Chapter 4. It was a grim-faced pair who set out 2 hours later. On Holt's advice, Will had taken off the green and grey cloak that marked him as a ranger. It was concealed inside his blanket roll. He kept his longbow and arrows in a canvas bow case slung from Tug's saddle. Similarly, Alyss had changed from her distinctive white courier's robe. Instead, she wore a plain green dress of homespun fabric and a brown woolen cloak. The choice of colours was intentional. They would help her blend into the woodland background in which they'd be travelling. Inquiries at the village and some of the outlying farms told them that the roamers had moved off to the south. They were travelling in a convoy of 5 caravans, with an accompanying assortment of horses, dogs, and goats. None of the locals who had seen them on the road had noticed a black and white border shepherd among the dogs. Nor had they noticed anything that might pass for a fighting dog, but that was hardly surprising. Dog fighting being illegal, Will said to Alyss, they'd keep any fighting dogs hidden from view. And of course, Ebony was stolen. They'd keep her hidden too. Even though the roamers had a 3-day lead, and the best of a 4th day as well, Will had expected to catch up to them quickly. After all, whenever he'd seen roamers on the move, they had travelled at little more than walking pace. However, by the end of the 2nd day, he inquired at a farm and found that the caravans had passed through 2 days prior. He was puzzled by this and mentioned the fact to Alyss. "I asked Lady Pauline about roamers when I went to the castle to fetch my travelling gear," she said. "She's had a bit to do with them over the years. She told me it's normal practice for them when they move on to really push the pace for the first few days, particularly if they've stolen something. That way, they're well out of the district by the time the theft is discovered." "Makes sense," Will said. He looked up at the sky. The sun was almost setting and there was only half an hour of daylight left. "Do you mind if we push on after dark for a few hours? We'll try to find a farm to put us up for the night, rather than set up camp in the dark." "Fine by me," Alyss said. She shared Will's anxiousness to catch up with the band. The fear that Ebony could be pitted against a vicious fighting dog any day was now uppermost in both their minds. The moon rose shortly after dark, bathing the countryside around them in a pale blue light. They rode on in silence until, around 9 that evening, they saw a lighted window in a small farmhouse. "Better stop here," Alyss advised. "Farmers go to bed early. If we wait any longer, we'll be waking them up. Chances are they won't like that." She proved to be right. When they approached the farmhouse, to the accompaniment of the furious barking of a pair of farm dogs, they were greeted by a farmer who appeared at the door, a lantern in his hand. He was already dressed in a nightshirt, and it was clear that he was about to retire for the night. "What do you want?" he called suspiciously. Mindful of the dogs, which seemed eager to get at them, Will and Alyss had stayed outside the fenced-off farmhouse yard. "We're travellers," Will called in reply. "My sister and I are looking for lodging for the night. We're happy to pay you for your trouble." The farmer paused. The idea of payment was obviously attractive to him. "Dismount and come here. Let's have a look at you." Will dismounted, Alyss following him. He stopped with his hand on the gate latch, nodding to the 2 dogs. "Are those dogs all right?" he asked. "They are, unless I tell them otherwise. Down, you 2! Shut your noise!" The man shouted suddenly at the dogs, and they sat instantly. The barking ceased, but they continued to whine softly, as if seeking permission to tear these interlopers apart. Will and Alyss advanced slowly into the farmyard. Will noted with some slight amusement that Alyss managed to keep him between her and the dogs. The dogs shifted, their bodies quivering with tension as the 2 strangers came closer. But the farmer's control over them was total. The farmer held the lantern higher as they approached. When they were 3 meters away, he called for them to stop. Far enough, he said. He studied them for several minutes. Will noticed that he held the lantern in his left hand. His right, which he kept by his side, held a heavy spiked club. Behind him, Will saw someone else moving inside the farm, heard a male voice ask a question, a brother perhaps, or an older son. "They look all right," the farmer replied over his shoulder. "Just a pair of youngsters. They look harmless enough." Alyss smiled at the words. Will did have a youthful, innocent-looking face, but to describe him as harmless was so far off the mark as to be laughable. He could well be the most dangerous person this farmer had ever laid eyes on. "We can't fit you in the house," the farmer said. "There are 6 of us here." "The barn would be fine," Will replied. "We just want a roof over our heads. It looks like rain." The farmer glanced up at the sky and sniffed the air experimentally. "Aye," he said, "there'll be rain before sunrise, sure enough. I'll want 7 pennigs from you for the lodging, and we've no food for you," he added quickly. "We've already eaten and the fire's banked for the night." "That's fine. We have our own food." Will undid his belt purse and fumbled in it. "I'm short of pennigs. I'll give you 1 silver royal instead." The royal was worth 10 pennigs, but he was happy to pay extra if it meant he and Alyss could spend the night under shelter. The farmer set the lantern on the ground and held out his hand, snapping his thumb and forefinger together. "A silver royal it is, then," he said. Will stepped forward. One of the dogs, a heavy-set brindle, quivered and whined as he came closer. He noticed that even though it was supposedly sitting, its muscles were tensed so that its backside hovered several centimeters from the ground. It peeled back its lips in a snarl as he handed the coin over. The farmer inspected the coin and nodded, satisfied. "All right, then. My wife will give you breakfast in the morning. Cover the 3 extra pennigs. And no fire in the barn. No candle and no fire. There's a lantern inside the door, but leave it where it is. That'll be enough light." "Thanks," Will said. Then one of his constant needs asserted itself. "All right if I light a fire in the yard there? I'd like to make coffee." The farmer grunted assent. "Keep it well away from the barn. And remember, the dogs will be inside this yard all night. Try to approach the house and they'll have you." "We'll remember," Will said. The farmer grunted again. "I bid you good night, then. Rest well." He made a shooing motion for them to leave the farmhouse yard. "Same to you," Will said. He and Alyss stepped back to the gate, let themselves out, and closed it carefully behind them. Satisfied that they were outside the fence, the farmer closed the door. They heard a heavy lock shooting home on the inside. The 2 dogs remained on the doorstep. They dropped to the ground, lying with their noses on their paws as they watched the 2 strangers lead their horses to the barn. Tired by hours of hard travelling, they slept soundly. Will woke once after midnight, hearing the steady patter of rain on the roof. He pulled his blankets high around his chin, glad they were sheltered from the weather, and went back to sleep. There was something very soothing about listening to rain when you were warm and dry in your blankets. It was daylight when he woke again, hearing a rooster crowing and hens clucking in the barnyard. The rain had stopped, but there was a fresh, wet smell to the air. By daylight, the farmer showed a more friendly face. His wife gave them a substantial breakfast. Will looked at the pile of eggs, bacon, potatoes, and toasted bread with a smile. "Farmers eat well," he commented. Alyss raised an eyebrow. "That's because they work harder than you." Before they left, they asked if the family had seen any sign of roamers in the area. 2 days ago, the farmer answered promptly. "They wanted to camp on our property, but I moved them on. Things have a habit of going missing when roamers are around." "I know," Will said. "I'm missing a dog." The farmer scratched his nose thoughtfully. "Aye, I can imagine. Well, I'd waste no time catching up with them. A Roma camp is no healthy place for a dog." He didn't elaborate, but Will had no doubt what he was referring to. They said their farewells and were on the road 2 hours after sunrise. This time they pushed the pace up, trotting the horses for 20 minutes, then dismounting to walk them, then trotting again. Each hour they took a 10-minute rest, then pushed on again. They didn't stop for a midday meal, but ate dried beef and fruit and hard bread while they rode. Their efforts paid off. When they stopped at sunset in a small hamlet, they discovered that the Romas were now only a day ahead of them. They paid to sleep in the kitchen of one of the larger houses, as the hamlet had no inn. They ate and turned in early, and then, before sunrise, they were back on the road again, keeping the same fast pace. As the sun came up and tendrils of steam began to rise from the damp grass, Tug shook his mane violently. "We'll catch up to them today. I feel it in my bones." Will hesitated, glancing sidelong at Alyss. He wasn't sure how she'd react if he began talking to his horse. "Go ahead and answer him if you want to," she said, her gaze fixed on the road straight ahead. He regarded her in surprise. "Can you hear him?" She shook her head, smiling. "No, but Pauline has told me you Rangers all speak to your horses, and you get that furtive look about you if anyone is within earshot." "Oh." He wasn't sure if he should continue now and answer Tug. Their communication was a very private matter between them. "No need to answer me." "Well, that's all right then," he said. The reply was one that both Tug and Alyss could take as being addressed to themselves. They rode on in silence for several kilometres, Alyss suppressing a smile.